Welcome back to another lesson at Educator.com. Today, Intermediate C++. We are going to be handling exceptions. We are going to throw exceptions out the window. Okay, quick overview. All right. Programs validate their data and their environment. They have to. If you don't, you're asking for problems. And then you've got sub-programs and modules all over the place that communicate with each other. One of the things they need to communicate back and forth is, hey, I ran into a problem. You gave me some data that's bad. My environment is bad. I don't have enough memory. I can't operate. My files don't work. I can't operate. The module has to send that information to their caller, to other modules, to the user. That's where you have exceptions to the normal run of operating. So you validate your data and your environment. You communicate that. Any problems that you run into, you would communicate that. Now there's traditional validation where you call a function, you get a status return. It returns a status. You look at the status. Typically things like 0 means it's good, positive is good, negative means something happening. -1 means it's bad, -2 means it's bad for this reason, -3 means it's bad for that reason, etc., etc. It depends on what system you're on, what application you're running, what company you're working for. They'll have their standards. Some people they'll assign sub-processes, groups of status numbers. So this sub-organization, all their status errors will be between 1,000 and 2,000. So if you get an error code of 1,050, it's from these people. 2,084 is from these people. So you not only have an error code that says what went wrong, the error code also tells you what sub-process detected the error. The trouble with that method, traditional method, you get a return status. The caller can ignore it. It just calls a function. It says, compute all this information for me. And it returns a -1. It says, I can't compute the information because whatever. And the caller just says, throws the status away and just keeps on going. So that, if the caller ignores the status, that can lead to, depending on what the error is, that can lead to more errors further on, later on in the application. The application may crash later on. Now, the advantage you get with an exception, if the caller explicitly ignores it, not explicitly ignores it, if he doesn't handle it and the exception is thrown, the application will crash. Now, of course, the caller is still free to ignore it. He can handle the exception, and in his handler, it just does nothing. But at least he has to handle it. Now, functions and object methods can throw an exception. What we call it is that's the key word, throw. Is throw an exception if an error condition is detected. We have divide by 0. Divide these two numbers. Well, let me check the denominator first. Oh, the denominator is 0. If I do that divide, I'll crash. So instead, I will throw an exception. Now, the exception that is explicitly thrown and then caught by the caller can be almost any type. We'll take a look at integers, we'll look at character strings, and then we'll look at the actual exception class, which will be declared like a type. So the callers can catch an exception of a given type. You don't specifically say, I want to catch error number 7. What you do is I want to catch an integer type. And when you've caught an integer type, then you look at it, so what is the type number that was thrown? So if it's 7, oh, well, that means something happened. If it's 8, that means something else happened. And there's also a catch-all. I want to catch the integer exception. I want to catch the double exception. I want to catch the character string exception. I want to catch the exception class exception. And if it's not in that list of exceptions, I've got my catch-all. And there's also a throw keyword like a function, which is not just throwing an exception, but it's something you put on the function prototype or the method prototype and say, it's telling the compiler, this is the type of exception that I will throw or I might throw. So it's something so the compiler can make certain adjustments based on what types of exceptions that might get thrown in that function. Now, you have an exception class, which can be used as a type, which can be thrown. You can also derive, since it's a class, you can derive other exceptions from that. And in the standard library, there are already several that have been derived from the exception, and we'll take a look at one or two of those. But you don't have to. You can derive your own class independently. So this is going to be my exception, which is not derived from the exception class, and you can throw that as your type. Now, you may want to do that in cases where you need more information than what the standard exception class gives you. The standard exception will say what, which is this, something bad happened. Whereas you might want to say, well, I want to say something bad happened, plus I want to have an error code, plus I want to have a severity code. If the severity code is between 0 and 1, 0 and 5, for whatever, you say, don't worry about it, just information. If it's between 6 and 10, you say, hey, this is pretty bad, you might want to think about doing something. If it's above 10, you say, hey, close down the computer, stop processing, this is a very, very bad error. And those are the things that you can define in your own exception class if that's what you need to do.